When we commit sinful acts, we become slaves to sin. We say, shackle me up. Oh wait, you forgot the thing around my neck. Oh wait, you forgot the fetters around my foot, the clamps there. Yeah, the chains. Here I am, sin. Oh, you missed a spot. Working through Romans 7 today, and I want to start with just a quick recap. Maybe it's been a couple of weeks, and this is a big series on Romans, so I'll try to do it concisely. Paul starts in chapter 1, one of the key verses. He says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation. So we hear right from the get-go, Paul is eager to share about the power of God. Well, why? Because there's a problem in the church in Rome. There's a division between the Gentile Christians, that means sometimes they're called Greeks, but it means non-Jewish Christians, and there's the Jewish Christians, and they're not quite getting along. There's some issues that have arose. And so Paul is writing to try to bring unity. Then he starts early on, as you could see in chapter 2, he goes through and he starts, well, God's in 1 and 2, and he just starts by saying, hey, look, you're sinful, and you're sinful, and you're sinful, and you're sinful, and you're sinful. We're all sinful. Gentiles, you have a problem with sin. Jews, you have a problem with sin too. But we're all equal in that we all have a problem with sin. So it's not a very optimistic way of uniting, but he's getting to that. He starts by laying the ground as all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish. Then he continues to work through the narrative, and he's helping the Jews to understand their position and the Gentiles to understand their position. So after that, chapter 3, he talks about how nobody is righteous. That's kind of along the same lines. But then in chapter 4, he talks about Abraham, how Abraham was justified by faith. Now, for the Jewish people, Abraham was the father of the nation of the Israelites, of the Hebrews, of the Jewish people. Abraham was the father. Maybe you grew up in church and you had a little song where you said, Father Abraham had many sons, and you did that right arm, left arm, you did all that. I did that anyway. I won't do it now. I'll spare you the dance. But there was a story that he's telling. And so for the Jewish people, they connect with that. They said, yes, Abraham is our father. We are children of Abraham. But Paul says here, yes, you are. But also, Gentiles, you too are children of Abraham. Because what makes you a real child of Abraham is not your bloodline or your lineage. What makes you a real child of Abraham is the faith that you put in God, particularly in Jesus Christ. Because Abraham it said his faith was credited to him as righteousness. So he was put to rights by his faith in God, not by his actions, not by obeying the law. The law wasn't even around. So he talks about and tries to connect the dots. He wants the Gentiles to know, and that includes us. We're Gentiles. We're non-Jewish Christians. Maybe you're Jewish, but he wants the non-Jewish Christians to know you are part of this story. The salvation story that God began with Abraham is still going to this day. And that through Jesus Christ, the Gentiles have been welcomed in. And we'll get to that later in Romans. He goes into more details, and it's like branches that are grafted in. But it's important for us even today to realize that we are part of Abraham's family, not in bloodline, but by faith. Paul wants the Gentile Christians to realize that. He wants the Jewish Christians to realize that too. He says, hey, Jewish Christians, you thought you were a little special because you're part of Abraham's bloodline. But let me tell you, it's not the bloodline that makes it. It's the faith in Jesus that puts you in the family of Abraham and the plan of salvation for all of creation that God initiated. After that, he goes to Adam. in chapter 5, and he starts talking about Adam. Again, these are the core pieces of the narrative for the Jewish people, right? Abraham was one of those narratives. The Exodus is another one, which also Paul sort of maps through chapters 5, 6, and 7. It's an arc like the Exodus. These things parallel each other. It's super complex and nuanced. When you study, you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know he was doing that. So he's trying to map this arc of the story of Exodus. And at the same time, he talks about Adam, the belief that from creation, sin entered the world, as he writes here, through Adam. Adam was the scapegoat, so to speak. Adam was the one who brought sin into the world because there was a command that God had given him and Eve, and they broke it. And so Adam is the symbolic person and the story of the flesh. So that within each human being, there's something called the flesh. There's a certain part of us that responds in a sinful way, and we have desires that are not honoring to God. It's not wrong to be human. God made humans in his own likeness. Male and female, he created them in his own likeness. So there's nothing wrong with humanity in how God made a human. But what happened is after the sin of Adam, it became a default setting within us. We have this default setting called the flesh, as Paul calls it, which is a sinful desire. There's a tug, there's a thing in us that makes us want to respond in sinful ways. And so he said, look, Adam was the one who brought sin into the world, but Christ is the one who dealt with sin once and for all. And so he tries to help people see, look, we're all under this, we're all equal again, Jewish and non-Jewish, we're equal under Adam. We all have a fleshly nature to us, something that desires to sin. Okay? We all have that. But the good news, as he points out, is that Jesus is the anti-Adam, so to speak. Jesus paid the price, and Jesus solved the problem that Adam introduced. By introducing sin into the world, Christ was the one who remedied that problem. And that's in chapter 5. But throughout all of this, he's also talking about the law and the role of the law. And actually, if you're reading it so far, a lot of what Paul has to say about it, it sounds like it's not that good. And you're wondering, well, then why did God do that? What's the point of the law? And all of chapter 7 is about the law, okay? And when I say the law, I also have to expand on that. The law doesn't just mean the rules of right and wrong. When it says the law in here, it means the first 5 books of the Bible. Sometimes that's called the Pentateuch. Sometimes it's called the Torah, okay? And this is what it means by the law. It's not just the 613 rules that God gave to Moses in the desert. It's the whole 5 books. And it does contain rules and regulations, but it's beyond that. It's the whole first 5 books. And it's basically the covenant charter. That's what N.T. Wright says. It's the covenant charter of the Jewish nation. And so the law is such a big deal. It's such a key thing. It's part of their identity. They were the chosen people via Abraham that God had said, I'm going to bring about this giant arc and plan of salvation, and I'm going to give you the law. You're going to be a light to the world. You're going to be a light to the nations. You're going to be my chosen people. And then, as we know later, after Abraham, then comes Egypt, and then the people, Israelites, were in Egypt for 400 years. God heard their cries, and he brings them out in the Exodus. And while they're out in the desert in Sinai, God gives them the law. They've been a people who weren't really well formed because they were slaves. They didn't have a choice. They didn't have much say in their own society. But now they're free. And so how are we going to structure society? What are we going to do? How are we going to represent God? How are we going to be a light to the world? We don't even know how to exist together, these 2 to 3 million people. So now they have freedom, and God gives them the law as part of the grand scheme of things, as part of the big plan. And the law helps them to know who God is and how they should be responding to God. Okay? But there's some limitations. And that's where we get to today. There's some limitations in how we respond to the law. And last week, Greg talked about being dead to sin and alive to Christ. And like I mentioned just briefly, chapters 6, 7, and 8, they sort of follow that arc of the Exodus story. So next week, we're going to begin chapter 8, and things really get more positive. But we kind of have to get everybody depressed on the same page so you know how bad things are, so that when we tell you how good things can be, you have a perspective. Okay? So bear with me a little bit. So as we look at that, as we look at the story here, we see that Paul was writing this whole passage about the I being Israel. Israel had a very challenging relationship with the law. They felt privileged to have it, but there's a certain paradox in here, because as they would hug the law closer, it would also increase in them the desire to sin. And so in this passage, one of the things that's a little bit different as well is sin in this passage is not talking about the acts of sin, but it's talking about the sin as a power, as a principality or a force. It's almost the same as, like, you could capitalize it. You could say sin with a capital S, because it's different, and you can tell he's not talking about sin in the same way. He's talking about sin as a dark power. And we don't talk about it like that much. Most of us have boiled sin down to sort of bad actions. Don't lie or cheat or steal. Don't do things that are immoral. That's sin. And that is sin. Those are sinful acts. But what Paul is talking about here is a power, a sinful power. There's a force, a dark force. And even it could almost be compared to the Satan, that there's this force of sin that exerts itself especially on the believer and on those who are trying to follow the law. So he starts off in verse 7 and he says, "What shall we say then? Is the law sinful? Certainly not. Nevertheless, I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. For I would not have known what coveting really was if the law had not said, 'You shall not covet.' But sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, produced in me every kind of coveting. For apart from the law, sin was dead. Once I was alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin sprang to life and I died. I found that the very commandment that was intended to bring life actually brought death. For sin, keep seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, deceived me, and through the commandment put me to death. So then the law is holy, and the commandment is good, is holy, righteous, and good." Again, this feels a little confusing, doesn't it? But if we think of sin as a power, as a dark force that is at work in this world, then it helps to make a little better sense of it. So I'm going to borrow one of N.T. Wright's illustrations because I couldn't find a better one. It's very good, I thought. But he shared the story of a man who was living in a bad part of town, or a seedy part of town. And so he was concerned about his safety. And so he said, I'm going to get a security system put into my house with all the bells and whistles. It'll be the best one, top of the line security. We're going to get this installed. So he called the company, set up the date to install it. Everything was set. He was feeling good. It'll be okay. Once I get this security system in, it'll be all good. Well, what happens is he gets sick. He has appendicitis. He has to go to the hospital, so he can't be there on the day that the security system needs to be installed. But instead of delaying it, because he said, oh man, I don't feel safe without that. I need that installed. So he gets a neighbor. He gets a neighbor to come and say, could you be there to meet them when they come? I need that system. Yeah, sure, no problem. I can do that. So the neighbor comes. And on the day of the install, the alarm company comes and they knock on the door, and the neighbor opens the door. Hey, welcome. Yeah, we're here for the install. Yeah, come on in. The neighbor shows them around the house. They do all of what was told. They put the sensors here and there. They put it on the door. They have the code. They got to put the alarm panel up in the side of the house. They got everything set, top of the line security, no problem. And as the neighbor's sitting there watching them install, watching where the sensors are going, and oh, you need a code. Oh, we got to program a code. Yeah, how about this? 1978. Yeah, let's put in that code, 1978. So the neighbor gives the code, because you got to have a code for a security system. But the neighbor starts to think, I know where every sensor is in this house. I know how this security system works, and I even know the code. If I wanted to take something from this house, I could do that whenever I want. Nobody would ever know, because I know exactly how this system works. I know where everything is. Okay. Now, before that, this was a fine neighbor. They shared each other's leaf blower and lawnmower and shoveled each other's walks or had their snowblowers out in the winter, No problem. Good neighbor. He'd never thought of taking anything from this guy before until he saw the security system being installed. He said, if I wanted to, I could come in and take whatever I want. And so seeing the security system being installed birthed in him a desire to consider thieving, burgling the house. He'd never thought about taking that guy's stuff before. He always returned the leaf blower on time, the hedge trimmer, always. Never thought of it. But being there and seeing the security system installed, Now, let me reassure you, there was nothing wrong with the security system. It worked perfectly. The alarm sensors all were perfectly tuned. The cameras, the coding, everything was perfectly tuned. There was nothing wrong with the security system. But when you introduce an untrustworthy neighbor, all of a sudden, the top of the line security system doesn't really matter. This is a little bit what the law was like. The law, there's nothing wrong with the law. He just said, what shall we say? Is the law sinful? Certainly not. And at the end of this, he said, so then the law is holy, the commandment is holy, righteous, and good. The security system is perfect. It works just fine. The problem is the untrustworthy neighbor. That's sin. You did not even, the neighbor was trustworthy until he saw the law, until he saw the security system being put in. He was fine, never had any desire to steal till he saw the system get put in. So now sin awoke in him. It took advantage to say, hey, you could just take whatever you want from this guy's house. So the problem, again, wasn't with the law. The problem wasn't with the security system. The problem was with sin. Sin is awakened by the law. They say, and he said, I didn't even know what coveting was. I didn't covet anybody's stuff until the law said, don't covet. What? Maybe you've experienced that with your children. There's times where you think about, should I say anything? I don't want them to do that, but they haven't talked about it at all. And if I tell them not to do it, then they're going to think, well, why doesn't he want me to do it? Maybe I should do it. Maybe I should do that thing that Dad said I shouldn't do. Well, why not? Why doesn't he want me to do it? I didn't even think about that. But now that he said don't do it, maybe I should do it. Maybe that's you. Maybe that's how we're all wired like that in some way, right? But this is what sin does. And so he said, the problem is not with the law. The problem is with sin. That there is a dark force. There's a dark power that is awakened, that is active, that it works against us. And what he's describing is how sin has worked against Israel again and again and again. And they had the law. And if you read it like I equals Israel, and you read the whole passage, you see again and again, Israel had the law. Man, they had the answers. Why couldn't they do it? So it wasn't a matter of we didn't know what to do. The rest of the nations, they didn't know what to do. They didn't have God's law. So they're guilty in a different way. But Paul's saying, but the Israelites were guilty because they had God's law and they couldn't do it anyway. But he's not pointing fingers, and that's part of why he says I, because it's not they. He's part of Israel. He's Jewish. He's a Pharisee. He was top of his class. And it's his problem too. So he doesn't want to sell them out because he's one of them. So he doesn't say they, them, or those guys. He doesn't say us, he says I. But it means us, Israel. So let's keep going. Verse 13. Did that which is good then become death to me? By no means. Nevertheless, in order that sin might be recognized as sin, it used what is good, meaning the law, to bring about my death, so that through the commandment sin might become utterly sinful. 14. We know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate to do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. See, this is a puzzling piece, isn't it? We say, well, wait a minute. How could he's like separate from sin? So part of this is explained by if we say I is Israel, as it is no longer Israel who does it, but it is sin living in Israel, right? But it also applies personally as a dark force. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is in my sinful nature. That's the flesh. That's the Adam that we have in us. He explained that earlier. We're all from Adam. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being, I delight in God's law. But I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? I'm going to pause. So there's this dark force called sin that is at work in our world, that is at work in people, that is at work in us, that wants to see our downfall, that wants to push us toward destruction. And while the chapter is talking about the law in Israel, I'm sure you've read this and said, I can relate. At some point, you said, yeah, I see the right course of action. There it is. Here we go. And you don't do it. You say, I see the wrong course of action. There it is. I'll stay away from that. We cannot go here. Whatever we do, don't go here. We can't go here. We are not going to go here. And here we are. How? But I didn't want to go here. How come I'm here? I see that's the right way. I should go that way. I want to go that way, but I can't go that way. Why can't I go that way? And I know this is the wrong way. I don't want to go this way. But yet I'm here. I'm going this way. What's going on? Sin. Sin is at work. And this is where, so when we choose and when we do things that are sinful acts, it submits us under the power of the force of sin. And he talks about this in a variety of ways. So here we won't go through all the, but he says, I am a slave to sin or a slave to righteousness. When we commit sinful acts, we become slaves to sin. We say, shackle me up. Oh wait, you forgot the thing around my neck. Oh wait, you forgot the fetters around my foot, the clamps there. Yeah, the chains. Here I am, sin. Oh, you missed a spot.
Now, that's not what we really say. We don't know we're saying that. We didn't know that sin even had that kind of power. We thought sin was just like, oh, it was a little white lie. It was just this. It was just that. It looked so good. I deserved it. I get what's coming to me. I should get that. You know, sin, it's very alluring. Don't get me wrong. You know, it's very alluring. And there is a power. So part of the point of today is to say, do not underestimate sin. Don't underestimate the power of sin. And what happens when you underestimate the power of sin, then you underestimate the acts of sin. But the acts of sin, committing sinful acts, puts you under the power of sin. And you give up your freedom. And Jesus said, no, or Paul's writing, he said, no, in Christ you're free. But we're going to get to that later. But this is the whole point, is to say, look, you're totally sunk. You're sunk. I'm sunk. They're sunk. We're sunk. The power of sin is serious. It's not to be mucked about with or played around with. Sin is a real thing, and it's not just little chintzy acts that people think, oh, Christianity is those boring people. They never have fun. I was thinking about, I was at one of the hockey games with the kids, and they put on the song Highway to Hell by AC/DC. Man, it really conveys what the world believes. I'm on the highway to hell. You're like, man, it's so deceived. It's so deceived. Absolutely, completely, utterly deceived. And the thing is, sin is it's so alluring and it's so tricky. It says, hey, come. No. Think about it. Look how many people are choosing this course of action. There's hundreds of us. There's thousands of us. There's millions of us. Could we be wrong? No, look at how many. We're all here. Yeah, on the highway to hell. But hey, it's a party. Come on. You don't want to be bored. Come on, let's go. And really, if you were to put the glasses on, the gospel glasses, right, you'd see people shuffling along like this. Now, you take the gospel glasses off, and they're like, yeah, party, woo, and partying and everything, and it looks all fun. Come on. You put the gospel glasses back on, and you're like, oh. Ching, 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 ching. Highway to hell. Ching, ching, ching. That's the reality. They don't know. Even as Greg talked about last week, he said, part of the issue is people are like, well, wait a minute, Paul, if grace is this free and it's that good, what if people just say like, well, wait a minute, if I could just sin and get forgiveness, why wouldn't I just keep sinning? It's because you don't really understand what it is. When you understand what God did and what His grace does, you see what's really happening. You say, are you kidding me? I don't want to go shuffling along with those chains. I'm free. I would never want to go back to that. It's the symbolism of the baptism, of dying to Christ. And the whole first part of this chapter that we didn't even read just talks about how death sets you free. Because when you're dead to something, the law no longer applies to you. And we are dead to sin. We are alive to Christ. So we walk with freedom. And yet, the Christian still battles because we have the nature of Adam, which is the flesh. It's not bad to be human. Humans are made in God's image. But the nature of Adam still is within us and it resonates. And every so often, we keep those glasses on our head. We don't see it with the gospel eyes. We think, oh yeah, the highway to hell looks pretty good. Doesn't that look like fun? Look how many people are on it. I want to join the party. Because we forget, where are my glasses? Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I don't want to go on that. We forgot our glasses. We're not there. This is the lens of salvation, the lens of the gospel that we often think too small. What it really means, it's so much bigger. Paul needs you and me and his audience to understand how devastating sin is, how horrible it is, how much of a slave it makes us because of the power of sin, not just the acts. The acts submit us under the power, and we never see that because we just think these little chintzy acts, what's the big deal? Why does God want to ruin my fun? That's not what it's about. It's that you just gave yourself, hey, lock me up. Think about what he says in verse 24. What a wretched man I am. Who will save me? Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? That's part of what he said. The body, the flesh, okay? It's the Adam nature that's in us. He's also helping Israel to see, look, you've got Adam in you. And the more you embraced the law, the more your Adam nature came out. It didn't exempt you from that. The law could not solve your problem. The law is right and good and was part of God's plan. God didn't make a mistake. Jesus wasn't plan B. The law is right and good, but it cannot do what you hoped it would do. But it has done what God meant it to do, which is to bring us to Jesus. But we find in verse 25, thanks be to God, who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord, so that I myself in my mind am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature a slave to the law of sin. He's still torn. I see I want to do God's law. You know, you read Psalm 119. It's the biggest psalm in all of the book, all about how much the author loves God's law, how beautiful it is, how much he wants to obey it. And that's true, that's good and right. But when we still have this fleshly nature within us, we can't deal with it on our own. That's chapter 5 or 6 talked about that. That's the baptism. That's the dying that has to happen for the freedom. And then we have chapter 8 on the horizon. Boy, oh boy, it's like open up a party box. But we have to sit here for today to say it's really critical that you understand how horrible sin is, that we don't underestimate sin, we don't water it down, and we don't just think of it as little acts, but that we see that the little acts of sin put the fetters on it, put the chains on us, and submit us to the power of sin. And then we live like we're slaves to sin. Came to mind, there's an old movie called The Matrix. And there's a part in there where there's a villain who is an agent, and he's trying to capture the good guy, Neo. And at one point, the agent gets a hold of him, and he has him in a headlock, and they're right in front of a train. And they're watching, and then you'll have to watch to see what happens in the movie. Don't want to ruin it for you. But sin is like that for us. Sin gets us in that headlock and says, no, the train's coming, man. You're stuck, sucker. I got you. You're not going anywhere. And we're like, what can I do? I can't get out of here. Sin's got me. But then Jesus comes. And Jesus puts sin in the headlock and holds him there. The power of sin, he holds it there until the train comes. Kills sin. And Jesus rises again. This is what happens on the cross. My very much paraphrased, but Jesus grabbed sin by the neck and hauled it to the cross. He didn't let go. No. Sin, no more. Not any longer. You're done. Your power here is done. It's broken. Death, you're done. I'm going to take the penalty for this. And when Jesus died on the cross, that's what he did. Thanks be to God who delivers me. I was over here thinking I was partying. I didn't even realize that I was on the highway to hell. I thought it was a democratic process. I thought if we all vote for this to be the right thing, then it'll be the right thing, right? More of us said this is right than that, so this must be right. Isn't that one of the ways that sin deceives us? Our entire world will say, no, 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 this is okay. We voted on it. No, I like democracy. It's good to vote. But you don't get to vote on God's law or what God deems as sin. God's the only vote that counts for that. And so we'll say, oh, no, no. Look, everybody here said that to do this is absolutely okay. So we're good because we all voted on it. That's not how it works. Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. If we're not careful, we live in ignorance of the power of sin, that it is still active today, that it still has an effect on the Adam inside of you, the flesh that's inside of you and me. Even if you're a believer, there's a sin that can affect us. But we come back to Christ again and again, and we receive His forgiveness, and we learn to walk in His freedom and say, I don't have to be bound by sin any longer. Thanks be to God. But I don't want to get too far ahead because we're going to get really into that next week. There is a sense that today I want you to sit with the weight of this, to say, man, I didn't think sin was that bad until Pastor Nathan started to talk about it like this. I don't want that in my life. I didn't realize that. But the power of the gospel, and this is where it comes right back to the very beginning. I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation. And the power of God breaks the chains. It breaks the chains. That's the power. That's the good news. That people who are enslaved to sin, that don't even realize it, can be offered freedom through Jesus Christ. Friends, if that's you today, you're going to have an opportunity here in a moment. As we quiet things down, we prepare to take communion. I would encourage you to do some business with God. To say, God, I may have taken sin a little bit too lightly. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that I was in bondage. But it makes sense because the thing I didn't want to do, that's what I did. And the thing I wanted to do, I couldn't do. But I want to live in you. And I want to do the thing that you want me to do. So forgive me. Forgive me for my sin. And He will.